Hi, everybody. Good morning. I want to thank you all for coming. It's certainly early on a Friday to do a set of seminars like this. As you know, we've been doing the W9DYV event over in Jonesboro, Tennessee for a number of years. And we thought it might be really good if we allied it with a ham fest. And of course, we found...
That's his mic. That's fine.
That's your mic. See, it's you again.
Oh, you go head over here.
You're not helping me. So in any event, we thought it would be good to ally it with a local ham fest. And so we're really excited about doing that this year. We put together, I think, a very interesting and a broad number of topics to talk about today and tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to hearing about 630 meters. That's pretty interesting. In fact, we were talking about it just a few minutes ago out in the hall, wanting to know how we're going to build an antenna for it. So I'm sure you're going to help us out, Rob. In any event, our first presentation this morning is, of course, of a vintage nature. And we tried to make things a little different this year because we're going to be talking about vintage radio, restoring radio equipment back in the golden age, as Bob and I were talking about last night, that so much innovation happened in the late 40s, early 50s, into the 1960s. And it's an important period of time that we should try to memorialize and recognize the movers and shakers that brought things to our hobby we take almost for granted today. So we're going to have that, but then also we want to look in the future. Wes Shum, who this presentation, the set of seminars is all dedicated to, was interested in always pushing the state of the art back in the 50s and 60s, and he would have been interested in what we were doing today. And SDR radio is certainly today's wave of the future, and that's why we have some seminars today and tomorrow that will talk about SDR. So, without any further ado, we have David Beckler, who is one of my early novice friends back in the early 1960s. We both learned Morse code together and had lots of, in fact, we were sharing lots of old stories about things that we did that were quite crazy back in that part of our youth. So, David, he's going to be talking about Collins today.
I'm going to stand back here. Is this good to catch? Okay, well, good. I'm David Beckler. I'm N0SAP. And yes, the SAP was an original issue call for me when I was a novice. I was WN5SAP. So I think that was probably today, I think, is a politically incorrect call to issue anybody anymore. I don't think I've run across any more SAPs since I've been in ham radio. So the FCC knew my sense of humor, and so I've been a SAP for a long time. It's all I can tell you. But I've collected into some old radios, and I enjoy the old boat anchor radios of my youth. And most that I have were some that I always drooled in the magazines that you would see, like the Helicrafter SR2000 Hurricane. Boy, that was the one that I always wanted that radio. And so now I have one, and I'm proud to have it and have it on the air and use it all the time. But some of the other ones that we have is the Collins equipment, the old gray boxes that we know and appreciate. And today we're going to talk about some that are very rare. We're pretty much familiar with the Collins S1 and the S3s. We see those on eBay and QTH all the time. But the ones that we don't see is the Collins S2 line. And the Collins S2 line is a very rare radio because they weren't made for the general public. They were never made for ham radio. These were 300 radios that they put together for government agencies, consulates and embassies around the world. And as the quote was, a few other government agencies. So I'm thinking possible CIA operations, but that is what we're going to talk about today. This receiver was found at a local auction in Springfield, Missouri, by a guy named Eddie Williams, K5EW. and K0EW, I should say. Let me get his call sign correct. And while at his estate, a friend of mine, Dean Pruill, said that this radio was a very rare radio. And so I really didn't pay much attention to it because I was interested in looking at buying a lot of other equipment that he had there. So I did. I bought all I could buy. And this was one of the radios. So getting this radio home, I was trying to figure out what was so interesting about this radio, because inside on the ID tag it says it's a 75S1 receiver. Oh, wrong one. Here it is here. And so I thought, well, what's so special about that? Then I noticed on the front there is a dual crystal deck like you see on the KWM2As and on the 3As. And also, there's a plastic tube on the escutcheon here that was glued on to make it a 75S2. So that drew my attention to this radio. And so I went to Google and looking for this radio, and there's nothing on Google. I went to the Collins Association, the Collectors Association, and there's nothing on the Collins S2 line. So I have the beginning of a sizable collection of ham radio library, and I pulled out several of these books, and I started finding bits and pieces about the S2 line. What was interesting, like I said, was that there was only 300 of these ever made. And with the government agencies overseas, we know what happens to stuff with the government when it goes obsolete. They just throw them away. So since they were overseas, a lot of these never made it back to the States. Only one confirmed Mars station was Fort Sam Houston in Texas in 1961, had an S2 line.
I used one in Germany at Frankfurt, 3rd Armored Division headquarters, early 70s.
Okay, and you see, that's why we're doing this, because, I mean, in my research, I've asked a lot of people across the country that are Collins collectors, and I was not able to get a whole lot of information. So with this video, hopefully this will bring forth to other people who might have more information than I do on these. But the things that I found was interesting is that this receiver, because of this little tube glued on the front, Art Collins, I want to read his quote here that I found. These were produced, by the way, they was produced in 1958 to 1961, right along the same production lines with the S1s. And so this was the original government 3 to 30 megahertz radios that they made with the CP1 pack that they used on the crystals. Some thought it went with the KWM2A, which it does, but this was the radio that they made those crystal packs for. But Art Collins said that he says no more of that, because this is not a big enough change to justify a new model number. So that's why it never went to the general public or the ham radio operators, because this was a specific radio made for the U.S. government. I know I'm missing something here. I'm probably going to refer back to this again, but so the one thing that Art Collins did for ham radio operators was he offered 150 kits that you could buy to upgrade your 75S1 to a 75S2. And out of those kits, we don't know how many were sold, if all of them or a few, but Eddie Williams was the guy who had a kit, and he put it together, and that's why this radio is extremely rare, because those kits, I mean, even if all kits were sold and were used, it's just 150 of them. And so here we are with this radio.
So that was for the extra crystal bank, is that what you're saying?
That's correct. The extra crystal bank was put in with the band switch, and so that was one thing. And there was a couple of other mods that they did into it to make it the S2 model. And then the plastic tube was in the kit for you to put across the discussion of the radio. The ones that Collins made, and my story that I'm writing up and I'm hoping to publish in QST soon, I put Collins made in quotations because although Collins made the 75S1, this is a kit conversion receiver by a ham radio guy. That was kind of interesting because, I mean, that's quite a challenge to put this together to make it a 75S2. So anyway, that's kind of the story and the history of these radios. And so this receiver, like I said, is very rare. Here is a Collins-made 32 S2 transmitter. You'll notice on the transmitter that there's no dimple for your finger to go in to turn the VFO knob. And like I said, those are fairly rare radios. So that's the pretty much the gist of this. I'm trying to think. Make sure I'm not missing out on anything. The other thing I wanted to mention, and maybe somebody might know, on the crystal pack, it was known that this is a 3 to 30 megacycle crystal pack. And 200 KCs, you can plug the crystals in, you can make these radios go anywhere between 3 and 30 megahertz. Well, a couple of months back, I decided to get on 60 meters. And I built a 60-meter dipole in the middle of February in southwest Missouri. I think the temperature was about minus 20 degrees. I'm outside measuring wire and putting this thing together and putting the antenna up.
Bring us some.
You know, just the perfect antenna weather building, right? So, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to put these radios on 60 meters. And there is no 5 megahertz crystal in the crystal pack. So that was an interesting little find as well here. I don't know why that is. Oh, I got some hands.
Well, you've got the PTO in that range, and so it would have had spurrings with funny mixing products. So that 5 to 6 megahertz range is off limits.
Ah, okay.
Your oscillators are like 5200.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, there you go. We got answers now. I just thought that was interesting. I just thought that was a complete 30 to 30 megacycle.
Was there, for the government production, was there a standard set of frequencies they provided, or they just shipped the CP1 with it and they did whatever they wanted?
Pretty much, that's what they did. They shipped the CP1 crystal pack with it, and one that I had, I think it was this transmitter. When I purchased this one, it worked perfect. I put it on the dummy load, boy, it just loads up full power, just out of the box, just bang, it's just working great. And I went to get it on the air, plugged it into the Mosley beam, and I went to load it up, and the SWR is just off the clock. I was like, what is wrong? And I kept looking and searching, and come to find out, whoever had this, they moved this little ceramic pot 1,000 KCs off frequency for some reason. So that's why the SWR it loads up great on a dummy load, but on the antenna, it was 1,000 KCs off. It took me forever to find this, and actually the guy who found this was Brooks Barnes over in South Carolina, who worked on this radio, and he found this problem. I was looking everywhere. I had nothing. I said, I can't figure this out. And he looked at it and he goes, well, somebody diddled with that. So if it was overseas, maybe this was the CIA radio. I don't know. Maybe they were doing some kind of clandestine frequency thing, but that pot was jacked out 1,000 KCs exactly. It was pretty interesting. So this is that's the story on the S2 line. Like I said, you really don't see it. The transmitters are extremely hard to find. You do see receivers from time to time, and but again, they're very rare to find, and especially in conditions like these. But I'm fortunate right now to own 2 complete S2 lines. I've been diligently searching for these radios, and I've been able to locate 2. And I do have a third transmitter, so if I find another 75 S2 receiver, I'll have 3 complete S. And I'm talking with a guy who's the Collins, I think his name is Dave Kepler, up in Pennsylvania, and he mentioned something about that there was only 6 known to exist in the world. So if I can't confirm that, but if that's true, then I'm getting to where I own half of them. So, yes, sir.
I'm not sure I caught the distinction. What is it about these that the government bought these instead of the S1 line?
Because these were made for 30 to 30 megacycles. They wanted it for the military operation. So like I said, this was the first of the 30 to 30 megacycle radios. Like I said, most people think it was the KWM2A, which is true. They used that as the transceiver, but this was the first ones, and they were strictly made for the government. They weren't, like I said, they weren't made for amateur radio, although there is amateur radio crystals in every one of them. So I guess that was, coming down the line on the S1, they were just plugging in those, but they came up with the crystal pack for the government.
David, do you have the documentation on all these radios?
Documentation came from several books. I didn't write down which ones they are. I'll put that in my notes in there. But I mean, there's a sliver here and a sliver there. I did a lot of reading, looking through books to try to find answers on the 75 S2 and the 32 S2 transmitter. It was a lot of fun researching it, but there's very limited information, very, very limited. So that's why you don't hear anything about them. But I feel that I've done enough to kind of bring it to the forefront of the rarity of these radios and what they were used for and how they were designed for the military. And boy, they're just great to have on the air. Yes, sir.
Have you considered writing something up for electric radio?
I'm writing a story on it right now. I'd like to have it published in QST. But Electric Radio would probably be another good magazine to put it in as well. The only one that I have a picture of a complete line is out of a Collins book that showed the S2 line at Fort Sam Houston in Texas with a young airman, WAF, should we say, behind the radio operating it. So pretty interesting picture. But I know only few made it to Mars stations. There wasn't a whole lot that these were distributed along. So, like I said, most of them were for the embassies and consulates around the world. Yes, sir.
Do you know if that was shipped with the amplifier?
I don't know.
Because the KWM2 and the amplifier usually came as a package, the 30L1.
Right.
When
Well,
when I was at Fort Monmouth, back in the 60s,
Yeah.
that was the standard package that
Sure.
they did. And when Vietnam came along, then it was the KWM2 and that 30L1.
right.
And
Well,
that
like I
was-
said, I know they made the 30L1 at the time too, so it's very possible that went with these radios as well.
'cause that usually was the military's forte. They had the radio, KWM2 and the 30L1, because sometimes you just didn't have enough juice
Oh yeah,
at 100 watts to make the trip.
absolutely.
But, and one other note, the KWM2s, and I had a buddy of mine who was in Vietnam, a lot of those became hibachi grills.
Oh no, that's right. A lot of them, you hear all the stories about how they would toss them overboard coming
Well,
back.
it's not that we're tossing them overboard, they take them out of the case
Yeah.
and use the case as a hibachi grill.
I mean, look, there's a
Cook
perfect
food.
grill,
You know,
man.
cook food on it.
But well, that's what I was mentioning earlier. This is what the government does when they want to get
Right,
rid
yeah,
of
but
things.
this was not surplus.
Oh no, I understand your point.
We're done with it.
But the KWM2 was made for ham radio. The 2A was the military radio.
Right.
Okay. Yes, sir.
The ones that were sold to the military that were the KWM2A and the 30L1, they were part of a 3 Samsonite case
Yes.
setup called the AN GRC 93. And they also included, they had the 312B5 external VFO photocast thing in there. Also had the high gain tape dipole.
Yes.
And for the power supply, they did not use the F2 type power supply. They had, I think, PM2, which slid into the back of it, and it was a lightweight one, and it came with the crystal pack and the little special tool to plug the crystals in and out.
Correct.
And that was the 93 station. And usually what they did on the top of the case, on the trim, those things were engraved A-93 to cut down on the diversion. And in Vietnam, at the end of the war, when the U.S. was pulling out, they were taking these things out of the Samsonite cases, putting them on a hard stand, and run a M48 tank over them to crush them.
Yeah. I said, yeah, a lot of these were just.
Very disheartening.
Mhm.
Almost as bad as what they did to
Yeah.
the pre-90s.
Well, and then you remember the MM1 microphone too, the hand microphone. That thing would wear you out, picking that thing up. Thank goodness for Bob Heil.
Why college go to the S3? Just they would ask, they didn't want to mix military.
Well, the S3, and again, there's several versions of the S3. You got the S3, the S3B, but the S3A is the one that has the dual crystal bank. The others are made for amateur radio. So that's the difference between those. Yeah, another
S3C's
question?
got the crystal bank too.
Pardon me?
The S3C.
Yes.
has crystal
Oh, yeah,
bank.
no, the crystal pack worked for all of these radios, everything
No, I'm
military.
talking about, it had the S.
Oh, no, that's right, that's
C
correct.
had the S crystal
Mhm.
bank.
Yeah,
And
that's
they
correct.
made conversion kits to convert the Bs to Cs, very similar to what you see there. And
Right.
I bought 2 or 3 of them
Right.
in my youth, and it came with a little sticker that went over the 3 and made it a 3A.
There you go. That's what I'm saying. That verifies this little plastic tube that's stuck on the receiver here. That was just part of the kit. You had another question, Dave? Or somebody here?
I was just thinking about this.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to know how the barbecue tasted on the grill.
I wonder if they shipped the KWM2 with a bag of old Diz charcoal.
Royal Oak. All right, well, so anyway, that's kind of it. Like I said, you're welcome to come up and take a look at them. And like I said, these are just in really premium condition. Like I said, you can hardly find any good Collins radios in this kind of condition. But for this to be as rare as they are, they're just in mint shape. So, but like I said, I had to bring this receiver because of that conversion kit that's been installed in here. And like I said, so this makes it even more rare than the regular Collins-made S2, but that has the discussion on there that says 75 S2. I have never seen any 32 S1s made into an S2. Not yet. I'm looking, by the way. So anyway, if anybody has any other questions, I'll relinquish the floor to the next guy. Yeah, Jim?
Tell us a little bit about the power supply required for those planes.
Well, this one used the standard 516 F2 power supply. And like I said, it's the same thing what they used on the S1 series during that time. Everything that they used, the only thing different was, like I said, this was made for the government as the first 3 to 30 megacycle radio and receiver and transmitter. So, and like I said, just the limited number that they made. I have a friend of mine in Nixa, Missouri is where I live, and he worked for Collins for 12 years. Of course, he didn't work back in the late 50s or early 60s, but he said he never seen an S2 line before, so this was pretty interesting for him to look at as well. So, but anyway, there they are, and they're fun.
This may be a little too personal, and forgive me if it is, but have you given any thought to how these will be settled at the time of your assignment?
Might that be?
Well, and your name, I'll put your name on it.
They're going to Al Gallo.
No! But, I would have to think that, isn't there a radio museum somewhere
Must be.
in Ohio? I think it's in Ohio. It might be the place that they need to settle as a museum pieces. So it's fun to think that, these radios, I'm actually putting on the air, they're museum piece radios, to have them on the air and use them. I mean, that's just, makes your heart just, like, wow, man, I'm really special and proud to have these radios, to put them on the air and tell people and educate people about what these are all about.
There is the Voice of America Museum near where WLW is, some hams in the Cincinnati area put together. Just a thought.
Yeah, well, I have two, so we can spread them around a little bit. But, like I said, I have thought about doing that. If you go on my QRZ page, you'll see that there's a lot of things that I try to do that's ham history that I look at. The old WRL maps, the ones that we're probably all familiar with is the one that we probably had in our novice stations back in the 60s. But I have the original first issue, 1947 map. Also, the 1957 map was the first year that he actually put some color into it, and then the 1960 map is the first issue, because he's got the dates on all of them, so I know these are first issue dates. And of course, the 1960, what makes it different is that in 1959. Alaska and Hawaii came into the statehood, so it's the first time we saw Alaska and Hawaii on a U.S. map. And so those are up there. The other one I have up is a map. It's called "This is Amateur Radio, 1930." And you look at that map, and all of the hams that were licensed are on this map. First, second, and third districts are along the sides of the map because the states are too small to put all those calls in there. But a lot of those go back to the 1A call signs. I mean, it goes back in that area. There was no 0 district. It was all 9. It was only 9 districts. It's some of the things. New York was not all of New York was in the 2nd district. It was part of the 8th district as well. And it was 4 states in the 6th district. Instead of just California, it was actually 4 other states. So it's quite a bit of history of what amateur radio was like in 1930. A lot of people don't know about it. It's an interesting map to go take a look at. And every time I look at it, I always find something else that I didn't see before. The local radio club is W0EBE. That call was left by one of the original founders of that club. And on that map is W9EBE in Springfield, Missouri. So his call, when they created the 0 district, they just changed his call from a 9 to a 0. And that's how they ended up with the call. The club didn't know anything about the history of their call sign, so it was pretty interesting. So anyway, it's just part of history. It's just things that I think it's fun to collect and learn about amateur radio. A lot of things that we didn't know. It's kind of like, well, we always hear, it's because we've learned so much from each other. And if you haven't made one of these symposiums, I tell you, you have to come. There's a lot of interesting people here you can learn a lot from. So anyway, I appreciate it. Thank y'all so much, and enjoy the radio.